24th, I went at 2 o'clock to the emperor in his apartment. He had sent for my atlas in the morning. I found him finishing his examination of the map of Russia and of that part of America adjoining the Russian establishments. He had suffered and coughed a great deal during the night. The weather had, however, assumed a mild appearance. While he was dressing to go out, he often dwelt upon the happy idea of the atlas, the merit of its execution, and the immensity of its contents. He concluded, as usual, with saying, "What a collection, what details, how complete in all its parts." The emperor went to the garden. I told him that I had written in the morning to England and answered the letter which I had read to him 2 or 3 days ago. "Your English family," he then observed, "seem to be very good kind of people. They are very fond of you, and you appear very much attached to them." I answered, "Sire, I took good care of them in France during their 10 years of captivity, and they had taken care of me in England during my 10 years of emigration. It is altogether the hospitality of the ancients which we exercise towards each other. I rely upon them in every respect, and they are at liberty to dispose of all I possess. This," said he, "is a very happy connection. How did you obtain it? To what are you indebted for it?" I then told him how I became acquainted with this family. Never was the plank by the assistance of which an unfortunate person after shipwreck preserved his life dearer to him than this family to me. There are, sire, no favors, no treasures which can compensate the kindnesses I have received from it, and the happiness it has conferred upon me. When the horrible excesses of our revolution compelled us to take refuge in England, our emigration produced the liveliest sensation in that country. The arrival of so many illustrious exiles, their past fortunes, and their actual forlorn condition were impressed upon every mind and filled every heart. They became the subject of consideration in political assemblies, in places of divine worship, in fashionable circles, and in private families. That catastrophe agitated every class and excited every sympathy. We were surrounded by a generous and feeling multitude. We were the objects of the most delicate attentions and of the most substantial favors. Such, it must be acknowledged, was the affecting sight held out by a vast portion of English society, even in spite of the difference of opinions. It is a testimony due from our gratitude to the truth of history. I was in at London with a cousin of my name, whose situation at the court of Versailles had enabled her to be of some service to the most distinguished persons in Europe, where she was a lady of honor to the Princess Lamballe, who was herself subintendent of the Queen's household. That turned out a fortunate circumstance for our family. My cousin experienced proofs of the greatest benevolence. A great number of persons were eager in making a tender of their services, and among others, a certain young couple. The wife was charming and distinguished for the elegance and nobleness of her manners. The husband was of an easy temper, of a mild and honorable character. Their house was almost instantly open to my cousin and to all her relations, who had every reason to find themselves as much at their ease there as if they had been in their own families. This worthy couple took every occasion to oblige and to be of use to our refugees. Their house was frequented by the most distinguished emigrants. A great number of us there contracted a debt of gratitude which, notwithstanding all its extent, I should not despair of paying were I alone left to discharge it. I shall leave it as a legacy to my children, who, if they resemble me, will look upon it as sacred and deem themselves happy in redeeming the obligation. Elevation of soul and the emotions of a French heart characterized the conduct of Lady Blank. When the Prince of Condé arrived at London, was looking for a country residence, she sent me to offer him the superb mansion she possessed in the county of Durham. The prince, after hearing the particulars, having remarked that it would no doubt cost him the ransom of a king, was agreeably surprised at learning that it was presented to him by a Frenchwoman, who would, she said, consider that she had received an inestimable price should a Condé condescend to inhabit it. He went instantly to express his acknowledgment in person. This family visited Paris after the peace of Amiens, and it was in its bosom and through its protection that I was enabled a few days sooner to breathe the air of my country. I was exempted through its means from the tedious and painful formalities required for me by the act of amnesty on the frontier, and I felt it my duty to provide for their accommodation at Paris with much more facility and less inconvenience than they could have done themselves. I had also the happiness when the measure for detaining the English residents was carried into effect, and this family was placed among the number of alleviating in my turn their condition and becoming their security. We were at length separated by time and circumstances, but they have lost nothing in my recollection, and the needle is less constant to the pole and less faithful in its guidance than are my thoughts and my gratitude with respect to those good and valuable friends. Such, sire, is what your majesty is pleased to call my English family. We had, however, during my relation, walked to the stable and called for the calash. The emperor ordered it to take us up at the bottom of the wood. We waited for it a long time because Madame de Montsalon was seized with a sudden indisposition. Her husband came to apologize for the delay, and the emperor made him get in. The conversation turned during our ride upon General Joubert, whose brother-in-law and aide-de-camp Monsieur de Montsalon had been. Joubert, said the emperor, entertained a high veneration for me. He deplored my absence at every reverse experienced by the Republic during the expedition to Egypt. He was at that time at the head of the army of Italy. He had taken me for his model, aspired to imitate my plans, and attempted to accomplish nothing less than what I afterwards effected in Brumaire. He had, however, the Jacobins to assist him. The measures and intrigues of that party to place the means of executing that grand enterprise in his power had raised him to the command in Italy after the disasters of Scherer, who was an ignorant peculator and deserving of every censure. But Joubert was killed at Novi in his first encounter with Suvarov. Any attempt of his at Paris would have failed. He had not yet acquired a sufficient degree of glory, of consistency, and maturity. He was by nature calculated for all these acquirements, but at that moment he was not adequately formed. He was still too young, and that enterprise was then beyond his ability. The following is the general's portrait drawn by the emperor for his campaigns of Italy, of which I have recovered the sketch. Joubert was born in the departments of the Aisne in ancient Bressa, had gone through a course of studies for the bar. He was introduced by the Revolution to turn his thoughts to the military art. He served in the army of Italy and was there promoted to the rank of general of brigade. He was tall and thin and seemed naturally of a feeble constitution, but he had exercised it by severe fatigues in the Alps and had inured it to hardship. He was intrepid, vigilant, extremely active, and marched always at the head of his columns. He was made general in the room of Vaubois, whose corps d'armée he commanded. He gained a great deal of honor in the campaign of Loben, commanding the left wing, which he led to effect a junction with the main body of the army from the mountains of the Tyrol through the defiles of the Puttersal. He was very warmly attached to Napoleon, who entrusted him with the presentation of the law standards having been taken by the army of Italy to the Directory. Having remained at Paris during the campaign of Egypt, he married the daughter of the senator Semonville, who afterwards became the wife of General MacDonald. That marriage involved him in the intrigues of the Ménage and got him appointed commander-in-chief of the army of Italy after Scherer's defeat. He was killed at the Battle of Novi. He might have acquired great celebrity. The emperor was only able to take one round. He found himself too much fatigued and was far from being well. At 8:30, the emperor ordered me to be called. He told me he had been obliged to take a bath and thought he was a little feverish. He felt he had suddenly caught cold, but he no longer coughed since he was in the bath. He continued for a long time in the water. He dined in it, and a small table was laid for me at the side of it. The emperor reverted to the history of Russia. Had Peter the Great, he asked, acted with wisdom in founding a capital at Petersburg at so vast an expense? Would not the result have been greater had he expended all his money at Moscow? What was his object? Had he accomplished it? I replied, if Peter had remained at Moscow, his nation would have continued Muscovite, a people altogether Asiatic. It was necessary that it should be displaced for its reform and alteration. He had therefore selected a position on the very frontiers wrested from the enemy, and in founding his capital and accumulating all his strength, he rendered it invulnerable. He connected himself with European society. He established his power in the Baltic Sea, by which he could with ease prevent his natural enemies, the Poles and Swedes, from forming alliances when they stood in need of them with the nations situated behind them. The emperor said he was not altogether satisfied with these reasons. However it may be observed, Moscow has disappeared, and who can compute the wealth that has been swallowed up there? Let us contemplate Paris, with the accumulation of centuries of works and of industry, had its capital for the 1,400 years it has existed, increased but 1,000,000 a year. What sums! Let us connect with that the warehouses, the furniture, the union of sciences and the arts, the complete establishments of trade and commerce. And this is the picture of Moscow, and yet all that vanished in an instant. What a catastrophe! Does not the bare idea of it make one shudder? I do not think it could be reestablished at the expense of 2,000 millions. He expatiated at great length on all these events and let a word escape him which was too characteristic not to be specially noted down by me. The name of Rostopchin having been pronounced, I presume to remark that the color of that time given to his patriotic action had very much surprised me, for he had interested me instead of exciting my indignation, and even much more that I had envied him, to which the emperor replied with singular vivacity, with a kind of contraction which betrayed vexation. If many at Paris had been capable of reading and feeling it in that way, believe me, should have applauded it, but I had no choice left me. Resuming the subject of Moscow, he said, never with all the powers of poetry have the fictions of the burning of Troy equaled the reality of that of Moscow. The city was of wood, the wind was violent, all the pumps had been carried off. It was literally an ocean of fire. Nothing had been saved from it. Our march was so rapid, our entrance so sudden. We found even diamonds on the women's toilets that had fled so precipitately. They wrote to us in a short time afterwards that they had sought to escape from the first burst of a dangerous soldiery, that they recommended their property to the generosity of the conquerors. It would not fail to reappear in the course of a few days to solicit their kindness and testify their gratitude. The population was far from having plotted that atrocity. Even they themselves delivered up to us 300 or 400 criminals escaped from prison who had executed it. But, sire, may I presume to ask if Moscow had not been burned? Did not your majesty intend to establish your quarters there? Certainly, answered the emperor, and I should then have held up the singular spectacle of an army wintering in the midst of a hostile nation, pressing upon it from all points. It would have been the ship caught in the ice. You would have been in France without any intelligence from me for several months, but you would have remained quiet. You would have acted wisely. Cambyses would, as usual, have conducted affairs in my name, and all would have been as orderly as if I had been present. The winter in Russia would have weighed heavy on everyone. The torpor would have been general. The spring would have revived for all the world. All would have been at once on their legs, and it is well known that the French are as nimble as any others. On the first appearance of fine weather, I should have marched against the enemy. I should have beaten them. I should have been master of their empire. Alexander, be assured, would not have suffered me to proceed so far. He would have agreed to all the conditions which I might have dictated, and France would then have begun to enjoy all her advantages. And truly my success depended upon a mere trifle, for I had undertaken the expedition to fight against armed men, not against nature and the violence of her wrath. I defeated armies, but I could not conquer the flames, the frost, stupefaction, and death. I was forced to yield to fate, and after all, how unfortunate for France, indeed for all Europe. Peace, concluded at Moscow, would have fulfilled and wound up my hostile expeditions. It would have been, with respect to the grand cause, the term of casualties and the commencement of security. A new horizon, new undertakings would have unfolded themselves, adapted in every respect to the well-being and prosperity of all. The foundation of the European system would have been laid, and my only remaining task would have been its organization. Satisfied on these grand points and everywhere at peace, I should have also had my Congress and my Holy Alliance. These are plans which were stolen from me in that assembly of all the sovereigns. We should have discussed our interest in a family way and settled our accounts with the people as a clerk does with his master. The cause of the age was victorious. The revolution accomplished. The only point in question was to reconcile it with what it had not destroyed. But that task belonged to me. I had for a long time been making preparations for it, at the expense perhaps of my popularity. No matter, I became the arch of the old and new alliance, the national mediator between the ancient and modern order of things. I maintained the principles and possessed the confidence of the one. I had identified myself with the other. I belonged to them both. I should have acted conscientiously in favor of each. My glory would have consisted in my equity. And after having enumerated what he would have proposed between sovereign and sovereign, and between sovereigns and their people, he continued, powerful as we were, all that we might have conceded would have appeared grand. It would have gained us the gratitude of the people. At present, what they may extort will never seem enough to them, and they will be uniformly distrustful and discontented. He next took a review of what would have proposed for the prosperity, the interests, the enjoyments, and the well-being of the European Confederacy. He wished to establish the same principles, the same system everywhere, a European code, a court of European appeal with full powers to redress all wrong decisions, as our redresses at home, those of our tribunals, money the same value but with different coins, the same weights, the same measures, the same laws. Europe would soon in that manner, he said, have really been but the same people, and everyone who traveled would have everywhere found himself in one common country. He would have required that all the rivers should be navigable and common, that the seas should be thrown open, that the great standing armies should in future be reduced to the single establishment of a guard for the sovereign. In fine, a crowd of ideas fell from him, the greater part of which were new, some of the simplest nature, others altogether sublime, relative to the different political, civil, and legislative branches, to religion, to the arts, and commerce. They embraced every subject. He concluded, on my return to France, in the bosom of my country, at once great, powerful, magnificent, at peace, and glorious. I would have proclaimed the immutability of boundaries, all future wars purely defensive, all new aggrandizement anti-national. I would have associated my son with the empire. My dictatorship would have terminated, and his constitutional reign commenced. Paris would have been the capital of the world, and the French the envy of nations. My leisure in my old age would have been consecrated in company with the Empress, and during the royal apprenticeship of my son, and visiting with my own horses like a plain country couple every corner of the empire, in receiving complaints, in redressing wrongs, in founding monuments, and in doing good everywhere and by every means. These also, my dear causes, were among my dreams. The emperor conversed a great deal about the interior of Russia, of the prosperity of which he said we had no idea. He dwelt at great length upon Moscow, which had, under every point of view, much surprised him, and might bear a comparison with all the capitals of Europe, the great number of which it surpassed. Here, unfortunately, I can find but bare outlines of my notes, which it is impossible for me at present to fill out.